Our speaker today, Chris Hindle, shouldn't require much introduction to Thoresby Society members because he served as our treasurer for, I think, a record period of 21 years, looked after our finances extremely well during that period. And more recently, he has become the editor of our publications. He's going to talk today about Archie Scarr. Chris tells me that he is a relation in that Archie Scarr married his great-grandmother in 1897. So there is a family connection. And it gives me great pleasure, Chris, to invite you to give your talk on Alderman Archie Scarr, Leeds radical, Mayor of the Masses. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Alan. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk to you this evening about Archie Scarr, who is a man sometimes described as the Dick Whittington of Leeds. He arrived here as a 13-year-old in 1840 from Lancashire with clogs on his feet, and he rose against all the odds to become mayor of Leeds and a successful merchant with over 20 shops across the north of England. After his death in 1904, he was described by the Sheffield Daily Telegraph as perhaps the best known man in the northern part of the West Riding of Yorkshire. One of his political contemporaries described him as a man of remarkable qualities. He was shrewd with strong self-belief, whose greatest skill was that he was a crowd pleaser who spoke in the dialect of the working people to give greater force to his arguments. Scarr became mayor in 1887, just 2 years before the formation of the Thoresby Society. He was no antiquarian, though, and is on record of saying that he didn't think many people were interested in that sort of thing, and it was just as well that that was the case. And yet, in 1893, the Leeds Times noted that antiquarians owed him a special vote of thanks, as it was due to him that the decision was taken to undertake exploration works at Kirkstall Abbey. The same article concluded with news that the learned and energetic Thoresby Society were dealing with the history of the Abbey. Let's begin by looking at Scarr's early days at Kirkgate Market in Leeds. He was the son of a barrow man. His father sold fruit and veg from a wheelbarrow outside the market at Vicar's Croft on the corner of Kirkgate and Vicar Lane, which is seen here. This painting dates from 1854, and you can see the canvas stalls on the corner of those two streets. Scarr was a born trader, selling what people wanted, achieving a quick turnover and making a moderate profit. By the middle of the 19th century, he acquired a permanent wooden stall and expanded his product range to include dried fruits such as figs, which he called scripture fruit. He launched into confectionery, groceries, hardware, and crockery. Many years later, in 1942, the Yorkshire Evening Post carried a feature on a man who had worked for Scarr, Tom Hayes, who at that time was the oldest worker in the market. Mr. Hayes was born in Wellington Yard, which you can just see on the right-hand side of this slide. This map dates from 1850. He recollected his first job as a 10-year-old working for Archie Scarr around 1870. He said, "I worked till 5 in the morning till between 8 and 9 at night. He didn't sell spices then, but I was there when the first barrel came in. He was a good sort. gave us a real good do at Christmas. Grand affairs waited on us himself. Well, Scarr recognised the importance of being financially strong, which enabled him to buy goods in bulk. On one such occasion, at an auction in London, he bought the first of several lots of nuts and was given the option of buying the remaining lots at the same price. He bought them all at a time when there was a nut shortage. After keeping back what he wanted, he put the surplus nuts back in the auction and ended the day £120 ahead. In 1857, the open market at Vicar's Croft was enclosed and a new cast iron market hall, nicknamed the Birdcage, was built. Behind the building, there was a large open market square, which during the daytime was described as a place of canvas stalls open to the sky with a midden, a great open place on the south side, which in the evenings became a forum for political rallies. And on Saturday nights in particular, thousands of Leeds lawyers gathered to hear the racy stories and neat repartee of Archie Scarr as he retailed his scripture fruit. Around 1876, several new blocks of shops were built on part of this open area. And you can see those blocks here. There are 12 of them. Each block contains 6 individual shops. Now, Scarr took 4 shops in one block. You can see here the market square. Some of the blocks behind, and in the right-hand picture is Scarr's block. He later acquired the other 2 shops to occupy the whole block. In November 1877, he was reported as saying to fellow Liberal Council member John Barron that the nature of his business had entirely changed. His new premises were described by the Leeds Times columnist The Owl as comfortable, snugly enclosed with a veranda to keep off the rain, and included a glass case for Scarr to sit in. This was much better than the conditions faced by the other market traders who worked either inside the Birdcage or on the open market square. Later on in life, Scarr became an expert on the organisation of markets across the country. At Bolton, for example, he justified a laissez-faire attitude, as he said that whenever a town council tried to improve a market, a decline in prosperity followed in almost every case. One improvement he did suggest at Leeds was turning the market the other way round, so that the front, instead of being on Vicar Lane, would be changed to the market square, which was closer to his shop, of course. In 1866, Scarr married Isabella Collins, a lady described by the Leeds Times as a worthy spouse, a counsellor rich in wisdom and a helpmate full of resource. He compared his wife to his neck, stating that he was head of the house, but he couldn't move his head without his neck. Both of Scarr's wives are interesting. Like him, they were Lancastrians, outsiders to Leeds, and both came from prosperous retailing families. Isabella's father and 2 brothers ran one of the most successful business enterprises in Burnley. One brother became mayor of Burnley, and the other left an estate of £260,000 at his death in 1925, a truly enormous sum at that time. And his second wife, Alice, was closely related to both the Brown and the Muff families of the Bradford firm Brown, Muff & Co., a department store of such quality that it was nicknamed the Harrods of the North. Archie and Isabella began their married life here at 5 Grove Terrace, which is located in modern day terminology just north of the first direct Leeds Arena. seen here in the slide, and would now be right in the middle of the Leeds Inner Ring Road. Their first son, Reginald, was born in 1867, followed by Arthur and Wilfred in 1873 and 1875, respectively. All three brothers would join their father in the business and go on to play important roles in its development. Scarr's first marriage was a crucial watershed moment in his life because it was Isabella who gave him the final push to enter the political arena. He said, "For many years I stood shivering on the brink, fearful of launching until I met my wife. Then I prospered." Well, let's look at Scarr's early political life. He became active within the radical working class wing of the Liberal Party soon after arriving in Leeds. He set out his political creed in a municipal address in 1875. "In politics, I am a radical, which means justice and fair play to all. My creed, therefore, is threefold: protection to life, protection to property, and to give every person, either rich or poor, a fair proportion of rights." His introduction to the great national pastime of politics came amongst much excitement when, as a 14-year-old, he witnessed the Leeds parliamentary election of 1841. Throughout his entire political career, Scarr was influenced by one of the candidates at this election, Joseph Hume, a radical politician of national fame. Hume had been publicly nominated as candidate for Leeds by the retiring MP and newspaper proprietor Edward Baines at Hustings on Woodhouse Moor, a venue described by Baines as the scene of past radical triumphs. In a speech that Scarr would appreciate, Baines told a large crowd that Hume was a man who kept a vigilant eye on the public purse, and to him you are mainly indebted for the savings of millions of pounds. It was a sensational contest which saw both Liberal candidates narrowly defeated. Like many young radicals in the 1840s, Scarr joined the Chartist movement. He patronised Parker's commercial temperance hotel and coffee shop on Briggate, where evening debates were hosted by ex-Chartist councillor William Parker on current social or political topics. And it was here that he gained his training and developed his great skill as a speaker. I imagine he came across the national Chartist leader, Fergus O'Connor, who was based in Leeds as editor of the Chartist newspaper, the Northern Star. One man he did meet, and with whom he formed a lasting friendship, was Dr. F.R. Lees, a Chartist councillor and social reformer from Meanwood. Like Scarr, he was teetotal. Lees recollected that during his childhood in Leeds, he had gazed upon the flaming candles in the windows and the oil lamps in the streets, and he claimed that if he had the power to contemplate at the time, he would have seen the corresponding darkness in the minds of the multitudes. He was a man with whom Scarr had much in common, supporting a movement towards teetotal Chartism, which was a concept alien to O'Connor, who liked to drink. O'Connor also opposed any form of alliance between middle class and working class radicals, which was a union that gradually came about in Leeds as local Chartists turned to the democratic process of putting forward candidates for the town council. Eventually, in 1844, O'Connor left Leeds for good, relocating the Northern Star to London. In 1860, Scarr and the last of the Leeds Chartists were involved in the formation of a new group of agitators, the Leeds Working Men's Parliamentary Reform Association, whose inaugural meeting was attended by 2,000 people who came to hear the radical statesman and founder of the Anti-Corn Law League, John Bright, tell them that out of the 7 million men in the United Kingdom over the age of 21, only 1 million of them had the vote. Scarr was invited to propose the vote of thanks to the speakers. He was elected to the Leeds Town Council in 1872, a body controlled by the Liberal Party for 57 consecutive years from 1835. His chief message was always economy in the administration of the town's affairs. He pledged to use the ratepayers' money as if it was his own, and set out all he could do to stop unnecessary increases in the rates. Because, as he put it, and I think this is crucial to understanding Scarr's thinking, he said, heavy rates mean higher rents imposed by the landlords on the tenants in the cottages, and so place the burden on the working man. He spoke of the fear that this financial pressure imposed on those who could ill afford it. As the council gradually increased its responsibilities after 1835, greater public expenditure was inevitable. In Leeds, a preventative police force was formed in 1836. Responsibility was taken on for the supply of water in 1852, gas in 1870, and electricity in 1898. And the council expanded its influence in other key areas as well, including tramways in 1894, environmental health and amenities such as parks, libraries, and the markets. Scarr was horrified, not just at the prospect of rate increases to pay for all these services, but at the level of borrowings taken on board by the council. Speaking in August 1874, he said that during the 2 previous years, the borough debt had increased to such an extent that he was certain that if any private gentleman or company transacted their business on the same principles as the Leeds Corporation, they would have to stop and call in their creditors. Scarr's approach made him hugely popular amongst the Leeds public, and the Conservative press, with some irony, described Scarr after Gladstone as the most popular name in Leeds. 3 years after joining the council, he was up for re-election, and a crowd of over 1,000 people gathered at the Craven Heifer in Mabgate to witness his re-nomination as a candidate for the East Ward. So many that the meeting had to be adjourned and held outside in the open air. Ward officials praised him for his energy and hard work. He had done everything required of him. The Leeds Times described him as demonstrative. And in signs of his growing appeal among the masses, the paper stated that he was too well known and too much well cared for, not just in the ward, but throughout the borough, to enable him to be successfully opposed. This popularity amongst the people of Leeds was in direct contrast to the view taken of him by his fellow council members. They regarded him as an extremist, a dangerous radical who must be kept in his place. How strange, thought the Conservative press in 1879, given that the Liberals have Scarr's authority amongst the public, that his popularity was not recognised by the Liberal Party. Some of the reasons for this were clear. He used colourful language, and there were suggestions that he was vulgar, rough, and lacked polish. His anti-monarchy stance and contempt for formality upset many, including the great Leeds architect and Liberal councillor, Thomas Embler, whose patron was none other than the prominent Liberal and founder of the Leeds ready-made clothing industry, John Barron. Embler was much respected and had designed some of the finest 19th century buildings in the city, including some for his fellow council members, such as St Paul's House in Park Square for Barron, and the print works on Hunslet Road for Alf Cook. Ambler spoke out after Scarr had heatedly opposed plans for the widening of the Roundhay Road, with the press reporting Ambler's claims that Scarr's impertinence was becoming unbearable, and they should, and given his penchant for attacking the character of members of the council, they should turn him out. The press report continued with Scarr apparently having told Ambler that he didn't know how to give it. And Ambler's response, "You are so brazen that it makes no impression on you." The Tory member John Gordon agreed. He said that in council, Scarr had been a carping critic, a sneering critic and a violent critic, not only of his own opponents, but of his own friends. When Scarr opposed the increase in salary of the chief clerk in the borough accountant's office, Gordon accused him of being absolutely ignorant of what was paid for such work in private offices. The attacks on Scarr left little impression, with one newspaper describing Scarr's verbal attacks on Gordon as not dissimilar to a man killing a flea with a crowbar. But the real trouble began when the public began to demand that Scarr be rewarded for his service and appointed to the inner sanctum of the council, the aldermanic bench, or as the Conservatives put it, the House of Lords of Leeds. The whole purpose of the aldermanic bench in municipal government was to ensure that there was an unelected body of respected aldermen chosen by the councillors who would check any destructive radicalism of the elected members. And the last thing the ruling liberal elite wanted was a man they regarded as a dangerous extremist or an extreme radical with a mind of his own on the aldermanic bench. It would be like putting a fox in charge of the hen house. Well, there was no way the Liberals were going to nominate Scarr to be an alderman. And so on the 10th of November, 1877, sensing an opportunity to cause serious mischief, a Conservative member of the council did just that. Mr. Harland controversially nominated Scarr. Without hesitation, he said, to be an alderman. Harland said he was consulting the minds of the majority of the Liberal burgesses of the borough. Only 5 council members voted for him. To add insult to injury, just over a week later, another aldermanic vacancy arose when John Barron resigned his seat amid suggestions that his resignation had been deliberately delayed to handicap Scarr's chances of being elected. He lost the vote for this seat as well, with not one of the 15 Liberal aldermen present voting for Scarr. The announcement of the result was greeted with hisses from the public gallery in the council chamber. And in the Theatre Royal Christmas pantomime, Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack's mother produced the real wipes that Scarr had used to wipe away the tears he shed when he failed to become an alderman. A temporary rift now occurred between Barron and Scarr, which was made worse when Barron publicly disclosed that Scarr had solicited the aldermanic appointment. Barron was forced onto the back foot when addressing a disorderly public meeting at Leeds on 7th December. He told the audience that he had only feelings of respect and admiration for Scarr, for his devotion to the party and his talents, and to prolonged cheering, said he was quite sure that Scarr deserved to be honoured if any man did. The meeting quickly deteriorated, though, after Barron, never one to captivate a crowd like Scarr, unwisely decided to read extracts from speeches of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. There were loud cries from the audience of "No, no," and "We want another man," and "Scarr," and renewed cheers. Scarr finally did become an alderman in November 1880. One of his great talents was as a political campaigner. A party colleague claimed in 1877 that not a single Liberal candidate in Leeds, whether for parliamentary or municipal office, entered the fray without first courting the support of Scarr. He revelled in a political fight. He had a style that appealed to the public and which drew the crowds, a remarkably powerful voice adapted for boisterous meetings, a rugged style, peculiar gestures, curious phrases, and a wonderful gift of repartee. He was aggressive, sharp, and ready-witted, and there was point and dash in his speeches. A man who heard Scarr speak at Bridlington in 1898 noted, "People who read the papers know what to expect from Alderman Scarr. He gives no quarter to his opponents and would scorn to receive any. He keeps on excellent terms with the audience, largely by throwing at them some very funny tales, and it may be said of him that in his hands a tale loses nothing and gains much in the telling." In 1876, Scarr had seconded the nomination of John Barron as parliamentary candidate for Leeds, describing him as the result of a compromise between extreme radicals and moderate liberals. And when Leeds was allocated a second parliamentary seat 2 years later, Scarr was at the forefront of the debate as to who might be the best Liberal candidate. In the summer of 1878, he addressed a public meeting at Vickers Croft, between 3,000 and 4,000 people in attendance. And controversially, although perhaps not surprisingly given their recent fallout, he failed to endorse Barron as a candidate at all. He was even less enthusiastic about another potential candidate, a mysterious character called John de Morgan, a newcomer to Leeds who promoted a unique brand of radicalism and saw himself as a latter-day Fergus O'Connor, even founding a new journal, De Morgan's Weekly. De Morgan claimed that Fergus O'Connor started the famous old Northern Star newspaper in the row of buildings, if not the very office where I am now writing. Scarr told the crowd that he didn't know who De Morgan was and that he himself had more chance of being elected Emperor of China than De Morgan had of being named as a candidate for Leeds. In the end, Barron and a distinguished outsider, Prime Minister W.E. Gladstone, were named as the two Liberal candidates for Leeds at the 1880 general election. And both were duly elected, although Gladstone never took up his seat because he had also been elected as MP for Midlothian. This caused an immediate vacancy, which was filled by his son, Herbert Gladstone. At the celebratory gathering at the Leeds Mechanics Institute, Herbert was jokingly asked to nominate Scarr for a peerage so that he could reform the House of Lords. Scarr said if he couldn't get 20 shillings in the pound for the Lords, he'd take 10. By the middle of the decade, the Liberal Party was split in two over the policy of Irish Home Rule, followed by Gladstone, and a new breakaway Liberal Unionist Party was formed, which attracted many previously loyal Liberal voters. Scarr and Barron remained true to the old Liberal Party, with Scarr making it clear that he favoured Home Rule for England as well as Ireland. He supported Barron in the 1886 general election when he told the rival Unionist candidate, Sir Andrew Fairbairn, with more drollery than logic, that a united Liberal Party is a radical one. Although Barron won the seat, on the national stage, the Conservatives and the Liberal Unionists won a substantial overall victory. In Leeds, Scarr's appointment as mayor was becoming inevitable. The Owl commented that he was a bright and shining light in the middle of a benighted body. Give the reins into your hands and we should have a grand town. Such was the interest when Scarr was nominated for mayor in 1887 that the public gallery in the council chamber was packed. His proposer, Alderman Baker, said that Scarr was master of his own time, with brains, money, common sense, business attributes, and a spotless character. Unfortunately, not everybody agreed. Amidst loud cries of shame and hisses, Thomas Ambler raised an objection. Ambler stated that Scarr was unfit to fill the office of mayor, which he said should be occupied by a man of dignity and good taste. Ambler said that Mr. Scarr had wasted the time of the council, ignored state occasions in which he had been expected to take part, and when they had royalty, he had not thought it worthwhile to don his gown. In fact, he believed Mr. Scarr had not even bothered to buy a gown. When the vote was taken, there were just 7 dissenters, and amidst loud cheering, Scarr was duly elected as mayor of Leeds. His term of office proved to be a great success and culminated in a free public gala at Roundhay Park, which was attended by over 50,000 people. This was another watershed moment in Scarr's life. Scarr began the last decade of the 19th century with a party to celebrate his 50 years in Leeds. He and his wife moved to the imposing Clarendon House at the top of Clarendon Road, near the grammar school and closer to Woodhouse Moor. Their first grandchild, Reg's only child, Reg Jr, was born in 1897, followed by Wilfred's first son, Archie Jr, in 1900. Widowed in 1895, he married again in 1897. His new wife, Alice, was 23 years his junior, with 2 teenage children, and had been one of Isabella's bridesmaids at his first wedding. He found time for leisure activities and made regular trips to the continent where he picked up new ideas. He supported the electrification of the Leeds tramway system, like those he'd seen at Marseille, Genoa, and Milan, even though the cost of electric traction was double that of ground cable. He assured the council that the overhead wires would no more disfigure the town than clotheslines stretched across the streets. In business, he entered into partnership with his 3 sons and decided to run for Parliament, something he'd been asked to do on numerous occasions. He contested the seat for the Barkston Ash division in the 1892 general election. With the Liberal Party still split over Irish Home Rule, Scarr affirmed his loyalty by announcing that he supported the programme of the party in its entirety. As he put it, the whole hog, bristles and all. The Yorkshire Gazette told its readers that Scarr had the candour which Gladstone lacked. There are many stories about Scarr, but one which I particularly like is an account of a visit he made to Tadcaster canvassing for votes. Arriving in his horse-drawn landau, accompanied by 3 of his backers, all of whom were future Lord Mayors of Leeds, they encountered a 6-foot pot-bellied landlord standing on the steps of his pub. The man said, "I shan't vote for thee, Mr. Scarr." To which Scarr replied, "No, lad, I knew thou wouldn't vote for me as soon as I saw thee. If thou had as much brain in the head as there has beer in the belly, thou would. Well, Barkston Ash was a difficult constituency for the Liberals to fight. It was a rural one, where it was said that voters were influenced by the parson and the squire, and where some men felt unable to vote according to their own convictions. Scarr claimed that his opponent engineered a campaign of dirty tricks against him. Aided by his old adversary, John Gordon, and a host of other Leeds Tories, whose sole purpose was to reduce and vilify Scarr's character. The expected support from the nonconformist element and the railway workers failed to materialise, and Scarr was defeated, although Barkston Ash was one of the few Yorkshire constituencies where the Liberals improved their vote. The campaign ended on a sour note, with Scarr so unimpressed at his opponent's tactics that he refused to shake his hand. An area in which Scarr was successful at this time was the business. The expansion of the market in 1877 led to the creation of a new street on the southwest side called New York Street, into which Scarr's expanded. They acquired a block of shops here at 6 to 16 New York Street in the early 1890s, where they had their warehouse, a glass and china shop, and they were also able to let out a floor of the building for use as the Temperance Hall. By 1893, Scarr's had acquired another 3 shops in Kirgate Market, becoming the biggest trader and causing discontent amongst the other traders who claimed that nobody should be allowed to have such a monopoly. Scarr was once asked by a heckler when he believed in one man, one vote, why he didn't also believe in one man, one shop, to much laughter, with Scarr joining in. Scarr's now began to expand into other towns like Huddersfield and Keighley, where he had a confectionery shop, and across the county border into his hometown of Burnley. And you can see here on the billhead some of the towns in which he had his shops. In local politics, there were big changes afoot in Leeds. The Conservatives were becoming more organised, with new, younger men entering the political arena, including the dynamic and charismatic Sir Charles Wilson, who would take over the mantle from Scarr as the great character in Leeds politics, and who would lead the City Council between 1907 and 1928. Like Scarr, Wilson was tough and outspoken. He was a municipal imperialist with a view of expanding the influence of Leeds from the Pennines to the sea, and the man who once famously told a parliamentary commission, "I am Leeds." In most city council meetings, there was now regular sparring between Scarr and Wilson, so much so that the Yorkshire Post noted in April 1891 that a scene has occurred of a character which has become rather common recently. It seemed that Scarr had met his match. He described Wilson as a talking machine with a face of brass who could no more be stopped than could a torrent of water rolling over a rock. Wilson said of Scarr that he had a chronic objection to everything that was proposed for the improvement of the city. In 1893, the number of Conservative councillors reached parity with the Liberals, and the local journalist The Penman wrote a sonnet entitled "The Fall of the Leeds Oligarchy," a vision of what lay ahead. Well, the Conservatives obtained a majority on the City Council in 1895 and stripped the Liberals of half the aldermanic seats, although Scarr held on to his for another 3 years. In the mid-1890s, the council took on its last major responsibility before the First World War, the clearance of the slums. The Leeds programme was one of the largest in the country, extending to 77 acres of insanitary housing identified as unfit for human habitation by the Medical Officer of Health. With council expenditure exceeding its annual income by over £600,000 a year at the time, Scarr wanted the plans postponed. Wilson ridiculed his objections and said it was a disgrace that he should oppose the clearing away of unwholesome hovels. Scarr and the remaining Liberal aldermen were deposed in November 1898. The Conservatives accused Scarr and his colleagues of taking 20 years off the expansion of the city. Although a contrary view was expressed to its readers by the Leeds Times, who wrote that if Scarr's views on the main points of municipal policy were laid before the ratepayers who have to pay for them, they would probably be endorsed by the overwhelming majority, irrespective of party. Before looking at Scarr's legacy, I want to briefly look at the darker side to life in Leeds in the 1890s, which is something that public figures like Scarr were exposed to. In big cities like Leeds, violence and sometimes brutal attacks were not uncommon despite police vigilance. Scarr regularly addressed large crowds on Woodhouse Moor on Sunday afternoons. On one such occasion in June 1890, he took part in a local debate on a controversial bill before Parliament on whether the owners of public houses should be awarded compensation for the non-renewal of their alcohol licences. Many of those in the crowd of between 25 and 30,000 people were furious when Scarr declared the resolution against compensation carried. He found himself surrounded by a howling mob and had to be escorted off the moor to safety by a police bodyguard. And ironically, he was forced to take refuge in the house of a retired publican. In 1894, he'd voted against a plan to provide work for the unemployed at Roundhay Park. This caused anger, and a crowd of between 400 and 500 men singing the starving poor of England marched to Scarr's house for an explanation. Fearing a serious breach of the peace, the chief constable called out the corporation fire engine, and he and his men raced up to Clarendon House in taxis to meet the protesters, only to find that Scarr was away in Southport. Unfortunately, the crowd was persuaded to disperse peacefully and go home. But the most serious incident involving Scarr occurred one Saturday evening in April 1899, when he was violently attacked by 3 men outside his shop in New York Street. Speaking in 1937, the retiring Deputy Chief Constable of Leeds, Kirk Handley, spoke of the incident, rating it as one of the 2 highest profile cases he dealt with in his entire career. He recollected visiting the Railway Inn in York Street to arrest 2 suspects, where in the midst of much public disorder with glasses thrown, the men were freed by the public and escaped. Scarr, he never really recovered from the attack and was reluctant to talk of it. Although he continued working at the business, his public appearances were rare. In July 1902, he addressed a crowd at Leeds, which was reported by the Conservative press, who said, "He's emerged from his retirement. Everyone is glad to see him. Differences of opinion do not diminish the interest attached to his unaltering personality or render less entertaining his rugged invective. He's looking well, better than ever, in fact, and may he long continue to amuse the city of his adoption." Nobody, of course, takes Mr. Scarr's political views seriously. As a leader of opinion, he does not count. but as an antidote to the dullness of the ordinary radical speaker, he is invaluable to his party. So, what was Scarr's legacy? Today, he is best remembered for giving his name to a retail business that operated until the early 1980s. At their peak in Leeds, Scarr's occupied the whole of 6 to 16 New York Street, along with 2 more shops at the rear on Kergate. The Kergate shops seen here on the right, and on the left, the entrance to New York Street. You can just see the Scarr sign there. They employed a staff of 50 at what was described as one of the largest and finest hardware stores in the north of England. There were setbacks. Scarr's middle son, Arthur, left the firm to pursue his own business interests. And his oldest grandson, Reg Jr., died in the First World War, reported as being killed instantly whilst attacking German trenches on the Somme on the 14th of July 1916. And in 1932, his youngest son, Wilf, was found dead in his garage at Cottage Road in Headingley, aged 57, said to have been carrying the burden of many interests for a long time. Scarr left behind a political legacy as well. In 1906, his portrait, this one, joined those of the city fathers on the wall of the Leeds Council chamber and was amongst those relocated to the Civic Hall in 1935, around the same time as his grandson, Archie Scarr Jr, was elected to Leeds City Council. The Leeds Mercury commented that his was a name that stirs memories of great days of Leeds municipal history. No doubt Scarr would have been delighted to see his grandson following in his footsteps, but truly horrified to find him described as a wholehearted supporter of the Conservative Party, having said that he would never vote for a Conservative, even if the candidate was the angel Gabriel himself. And dare I say it, I would also suggest some similarity and perhaps continuity of thinking between Scarr and Sir Charles Wilson. They were in fact great friends. Both men were teetotal. Both supported hard-working immigrants, particularly from the Jewish community. Montague Burton described Wilson as the godfather of the Jewish community in Leeds. And when Scarr became a magistrate in 1887, he signed more Jewish naturalization papers than any other JP. Speaking at the Jewish Labour Hall in Templar Street in October 1901, Scarr said he respected all honest workers, in particular the Jewish community, which had done its share towards the progress and prosperity of Leeds. And did Wilson's much promoted policy of municipal imperialism have its origins in radical policy? The concept was similar to a view Scarr held, which was that domestic legislation should be made by large county government boards, with Parliament's role limited to imperial affairs only. And Wilson too developed a sense of economy when he dealt with municipal expenditure and could be ruthless in the use of his blue striking out pencil. So to conclude, Scarr was a genuine public servant who battled for a quarter of a century against municipal extravagance. And like Joseph Hume, he saved his electorate plenty of money. Criticised in some quarters for holding Leeds back, he may have damaged his cause by not being progressive enough about municipal affairs in the interests of saving rates. But he always rebutted such criticism by saying, I served the borough faithfully and honestly. I never opposed anything in my life, but from a strong sense of public duty. There we are.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that most enthralling lecture. There have not been any questions so far, but there is a comment from Linda who says, "Thanks for your research, Chris. I remember Scarr's large stall in Kirgate Market selling brushes, hardware, etc., but I had no idea of the founder's colourful and family background. I've enjoyed seeing photos of the clean cobbled streets." I see that Michael Meadowcroft has unmuted himself. Michael, have you got a question?
Well, you can save me writing it. Yes, just to, first of all, to thank Chris for an absolutely first-class lecture. It was really good. The irony is, of course, that his visceral opposition to the Conservatives was rather odd, because although he was a social liberal, he was a fiscal conservative. Absolutely so. Now, the one thing I've never been able to discover is what his accent was. When you see transcripts of what he spoke with a strong northern accent. Yes, given that he lived in Burnley until, what, for 20 odd years, really, what was his accent? An East Lancashire accent, or was it Yorkshire?
Yes, it's intriguing, isn't it? I mean, he moved when he was 13, of course.
13, right, but
yeah, I've wondered that as well.
About 40 years ago, Chris, I was summoned by an elderly alderman of Leeds who wanted to tell me various stories before he departed this life, because his father had also been played a key role in Leeds Council, and he had been chair of the Education Committee despite the fact that he was illiterate. And his favourite character, his father's favourite character, was Archie Scarr. And he said that his favourite tale was at a gala event at the town hall. Scarr arrived with his wife and they were in an open carriage, but she didn't get out front ways as ladies did. She got out with her backside coming out first. And he said to the crowd, did Archie, "You'll have to excuse her. She has to come out fat ass first." He says she's too big. So, you know, you can imagine the kind of Les Dawson character that there was. But the other tale, which I just thought was fantastic, was when they were trying to get more working class people to Roundhay Park. At the meeting, they started by talking about the zoo they were creating in the Canal Gardens, and that they were talking about getting more swans on there as well. And evidently during the meeting, he nodded off. And when he woke up, they were talking about the boats on the lake. And one of the councillors says, "Well, why don't we get a gondola?" And he said, "Well, why don't we buy two and they can mate?" I think that just kind of says everything about the man and his kind of waspish wit. And also he was of the people. And I thought your lecture was brilliant because you brought that home. The people loved him by and large. And, you know, the market mayor, it said everything about him as a person. He understood his electorate extremely well. Great lecture. Loved every minute.
Thank you. Yes, it was certainly a great character. There's so many amusing stories about him, aren't there?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, the opposition to him as Lord Mayor, I think it was Ambler who said you can't have someone dishing out turnips one day at the market and presiding over a function as Lord Mayor the next. But as you said, Ambler had very few supporters in the council. I might say to Steve that being popular with the public isn't always a good thing.
Yeah, I did wonder whether he might have been a mouthpiece for Barron, actually, because he was obviously very close to Barron, Ambler.
Yes, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think Ambler was particularly political. It was the problem. You know, he was the architect when all said and done, and he probably regarded as a duty to be on the council. But I don't think he was particularly political. Yeah. I mean, the great Tory at the time, of course, was John Gordon, who was a fabulous debater, and I've no doubt that he and Scarr crossed swords in debate many times.
Yeah.
We have a question from Kevin Grady, who asks, what about his religious affiliations?
Yes, well, he was a a nonconformist, obviously, goes without saying. I mean, he undoubtedly he was a committed Christian. He went to, his church was on the side of Woodhouse Moor, now being demolished. And of course, he was a great temperance man as well. And I think, I mean, I didn't really talk about the temperance movement, but that was the thing that Scarr said he felt gave him, his achievements there gave him the most pleasure.
His affiliation was a Wesleyan Methodist. That's what he was down as.
Yeah.
The fact that he wouldn't serve alcohol at civic functions was one of the things that counted against him becoming Lord Mayor. Becoming Mayor, rather.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions? I think you've answered almost all the questions that people had in mind, Chris, because detailed of all your wonderful research. So can I end the meeting by thanking Chris again for his most interesting and enthralling lecture. And I'm sure if everybody unmutes themselves, we could give Chris the round of applause that he deserves.
Yeah.